Welcome back, and this is going to be the part 2 of this video. So in this lecture, we're going to actually go into AutoCAD and we're going to discuss some of the stuff that we did in the lecture 1A. So if you haven't watched that video, I would recommend you go back to that one because I'm not going to cover everything that was in that video. So like I said, if this is your first time here, welcome, and if you are a repeat person, just please, if you find any value in this, hit the like, share, or comment button, or you can visit my Patreon for some time early access to some of these videos. Let's go ahead and cue the intro and get this started. Okay, so if you remember in that 1A video, we discussed all of the assumptions and things of that nature. This video is going to pick up right here at the absolute, relative, and polar thing. We're going to also kind of jump back and forth and look at some of these controls, but I'm not going to deal with the assumptions and things of that nature. So let's get into some of these important concepts. Alright, so let's go ahead and open up AutoCAD and I'll show you what the interface looks like. Now, if you downloaded AutoCAD, you're going to have an icon that's going to look like this. Now, of course, your wallpaper won't look like the one that I have, but this is going to be something that your wallpaper is going to look like. You can double click this icon, and that's what you're going to use to go ahead and launch AutoCAD. Now, when you first open up AutoCAD, it could look something like this, and you see I got some other folders and things of that nature that I have. Yours may be blank, so I'm just going to click on the new icon here. And then this is what's going to launch the AutoCAD default template. And your background will be totally different from mine. Mainly, I have mine set to white presentation just so you can see it a lot better. Alright, like I said in the introduction, so any of my videos that deal with introduction is going to deal mainly with all the stuff underneath the draw menu and this draw drop down. And we're also going to take a look at some of the stuff in this modified. We are going to journey off into some of the stuff that's going to create some layers, and when we get to those videos, we will discuss those more and more. That UCS is still sitting here, and remember that locates and tells us where 0, 0 is. The command line is going to be our super important thing. This is the way that AutoCAD interacts with us. A lot of times when I was teaching this class, or anytime I'm doing it in a live demo, I get a lot of comments from new students that said, how do I know when to hit enter? A lot of times when you kind of see nothing is happening or after you invoke something, basically if I tell AutoCAD to start somewhere, it's asking me for that input back. So you have to tell AutoCAD when to go to the next step. Some commands it'll do that when it's satisfied and it'll jump to the next one. But for the majority of it, if it's just sitting there looking at you, that's probably a good sign for you to go ahead and hit enter. Alright, and I discussed that command line is going to be either here or it's going to be right next to your cursor. We'll take a look and see how that's done. The last thing I'm going to do is take a look at the quick access panel. Remember that I told you in the previous lecture that this dynamic input is probably turned off on yours. If you want to turn it on, the way that you're going to do is you're going to come down to the 3 customization bars. Here it's going to open up the fly up, and then you're going to click on this box and it's going to put a check in front of it. Once you do that, you should have that icon there. Alright, some of those function keys that we had in those videos, and I'll reference back to the lecture, these are going to be super important to controlling that quick access panel from below. So you got 2 options here. Either you can select these function keys or you can physically click on these buttons here at the bottom. Like I said, if it's blue, it's activated. If it's not blue, it's unactivated. Okay, so for example, if I want to toggle this dynamic input on and off, remember that's the function key 12 on my keyboard. So if I'm hitting that button on my keyboard, and you can see that this light is turning on and off. So I'm just hitting the the F12 button, and that's toggling that on and off. Likewise with this grid. If I want to turn the grid off, I can actually physically select this button and turn it on or off. Or I can hit the function key 7 button and it does the exact same thing. I tend to leave my grid turned off, although I will show you in one video if for those of you who like using the grid, I will show you how to set that up and use the snap functions. It is useful if you're using something that has, the correct dimensioning on all of the stuff, but it is super useful. But like I was saying, that function key button on that whole top row of your keyboard, they can control various different things on here. You can also physically click them on and off. Some of the things that I want you to note is that you make sure that you can locate where each one of these are on your keyboard. So take a minute or two or a second and just get familiar with where these buttons are on your keyboard. Also, I want you to take a look at your mouse and understand that you do have a left click function, the right click, the middle mouse wheel, and this button. If you don't have a 3-button functioning mouse like this, I would highly recommend and suggest that you get one of these. The next thing we're going to do, we're going to kind of go forward here, and now we're going to jump into actually using one of the functions in AutoCAD. The best way I can demonstrate this is with the line command. Although absolute is not strictly dedicated to the line command. We can use that in some of the other commands, like for example, when we get into move and creating circles or copying things, we can use the absolute method as well. So we are not just stuck with only using line command and think that I have to use absolute method. These are nothing more than just data entry methods into AutoCAD. All right, so let's go ahead and jump into AutoCAD real quick, and we're going to make this little box here, just like it shows here. And then we're going to also create this kind of something in another quadrant, just to make sure we know what we're doing. Okay, so remember that the first rule that when we're using the absolute method is that we have to turn the dynamic input off. Now, like I was explaining in that first lecture, is that most of these commands that we use, so when I first come into line command, the first thing it's asking me for is to put in an absolute value or select somewhere on the screen, or we're going to select at an endpoint or an O-snap. And we're going to cover O-snaps in our next lecture, so don't worry about it right now. But when I'm invoking a command, it's going to ask me that. So the first thing I'm going to do, and I know that I'm going to use the absolute method here because I'm going to use it in various different locations. I'm going to go ahead and turn the dynamic input off. And then I'm going to go to the line command. So now here's one of those neat things that you know if the dynamic input is turned off. If the dynamic input is turned off, your command is going to come and read on your command line. I'm just going to escape out of this command. I'm going to turn my dynamic input on, and then I'm going to go to the line command again. And once I select the line command, you'll see that it's asking me near my cursor as well as on the command line. So this is one of those graphic things that you can take a look at and go like, oh, I know that my dynamic input is turned on right now because it is highlighted next to my cursor. All right, I'm going to escape out of that command again. I'm going to turn my dynamic input off. And instead of going and actually clicking on the physical line command button, long as your cursor is in the screen or the graphics area, you hit the L button, and you can see that on my command line, L is highlighted, or it's starting to type it out. I don't have to type in the whole word line. I can just type L and go ahead and hit the enter button, and you'll see that it will jump right into the command. So sometimes that's really useful, especially if you're creating something here and you don't want to go all the way over to the line command. By all means, just type that L and hit enter. All right, so it's in the line command. So the first thing that the line command is asking me for is to go ahead and specify a first point. This can be done absolutely, okay? So anytime we're using this command, whether I have the dynamic input turned on or off, this is always going to be the first thing it's going to ask me is, hey, you need to tell me where that first point is going to be located. I'm going to type it in absolutely. All right. So if we go back to the example, it was at 3, 3. So just type in 3, 3. And this is one of those things that when people ask, how do I know to hit enter? So we're at the point. We typed in our first point. AutoCAD is not going to assume that that's what you want. It's just going to sit there and blink right back at you. When I hit the enter button, you're going to see that it physically clicks my starting location at the 3, 3 location. Now, one of these things that I want you to take kind of note of is if you can move your cursor around and you can see that it's rubber banding with you, that means that your ortho is turned off. If I go and I click on this icon here and I turn the ortho on, you'll see that I won't have that rubber banding effect. I can only go in angles of 0, 90, 180, and now 270. Okay? So if you're looking at my screen and you're going like, oh man, his is kind of rubber banding and mine is not, or his is going in straight line and mine is not, typically the problem is that you usually have your ortho turned on. Now for me creating this shape, or if I'm using the absolute functions, I can have this turned on or off. It doesn't matter. As a matter of fact, I can put my cursor up here and I don't even have to touch my mouse anymore. I can just type in the next quadrants. So I'm going to type in 8, 3, enter. Then I'll type in the next one, which is 8, 9, enter. And then I can type in 3, 9, enter. And you can see I accidentally hit the apostrophe, and it looks at that and says, I don't know what that is. Let me type that one more time. 3, 9. Now it looks correct. And now we have a function in here. Okay? So while we're in the line command, we have two options here at the bottom. We have a close function and we have an undo function. If I'd accidentally put in the wrong value of that line, I can use the undo function inside of this command. So remember that when we was referring back to, and when we get to the erase command and the undo actual button at the top, I can use the undo back in this command to go back a step. So if I select undo, it'll jump back before the last one. And I'm going to purposely put in a number that's super crazy. So I'm going to type in 3, 5, enter. And you can see that that is nowhere near it needs to be. And I go, oh man, I messed up. Typically, most students will hit the escape button at this point. Don't do that. Go ahead and hit the undo button, and that'll take us back to where we were before. And if I hit the undo again, it's going to erase this line. So I can always undo back to the total beginning of this. Okay? So I'm going to go ahead and type in my next command, which is 8, 9, enter. 3, 9, enter. And you don't physically have to come down here and touch these buttons, right? While I'm up in the graphics area, it's easy for me to just type in U, enter, and that U just stands for undo, and it'll go back. I'll type back in my 3, 9, enter. And then the close function is one of those neat things. So if I close this, it's going to go back to the starting position of when I started this line command. So it's going to go back to that 3, 3 location. So I'm going to type in C, enter, or I can physically go down there and select the word close. So when I go to C, enter, you will see that it will go right back to the starting point and it will escape out of the command. If I would have just typed in 3, 3, I'd have had one more keystroke to do, which was go ahead and exiting out the command by hitting the escape button. All right, so I'm just going to kind of pan this up. And remember, I'm holding down that middle mouse wheel on my mouse, and I'll kind of refer you. Okay, so all I'm doing is holding down this middle button here. That middle button is going to act as a pan for you. Super important and very useful in AutoCAD. So make sure that you're holding this button down and just sliding it over left or right or up or down. It will follow you around. It will use a pan function. Next, I'm going to kind of demonstrate how to use the zoom function in this scroll bar. So that's when I'm just going to be scrolling this up and down. Do not click on it. I'm just rolling the wheel up and down. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do is show you how to zoom. Now, the way zoom works in this command is you put your cursor where you want to zoom to. So, for example, if I want to kind of get close to this end point here, I'm just going to put my cursor there, and then I'm going to scroll in with the middle mouse wheel, and it's going to do its best to kind of zoom into that area. If I go out likewise, if I come out to this area and I zoom backwards, you're going to see that that's going to try to be the center point of the pivot point of where AutoCAD wants to create that zoom from. All right, so the next thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to kind of create this, and I'm going to go with negative values, right? So I'm going to type in my first value using the line command. So remember, I can go up and select the toolbar, or I can just type in L, enter. My cursor is in the graphics area. It's good to go. So I'm going to type in -3, -3. And you can see that I did a little typo there. I'll just backspace, -3. And I look like I'm having a little fat finger trouble today. Okay. -3, -3. This is referring back to those quadrants that I was telling you in the graphics area. Remember that the X value is negative and the Y value is negative. So I'm predicting this, my line command, to start somewhere in this location because both of those values are negative. So I'm starting it in quadrant 3. Once I hit the enter button, and just like I said, it's going to start it in the negative quadrant button. All right. Next thing I'm going to do is just type in -8, comma, -3. And you can look down here on the bottom of my command line to see the values that I'm typing in. Enter. I'll type in the next value, -8, comma, -9. Enter. Next one will be -3, comma, -9. Enter. And then I'm going to use the close function. C, enter. All right. So that explains how you're looking at things in an absolute function. Perfectly fine. Everything is, hopefully you understand this, that depending on this, you have to know it absolutely wherever the points are. Now, also one other thing to remember is that each one of these methods that I'm showing you, you don't have to stick with one. So by default, like the line command starts off at 0, 0, right? Or and when I put in the absolute value, it starts off as absolute, but then I can go and choose another value. So out of all these different endpoint values that I'm showing you, you can choose either one you want. Okay, so let me go ahead and make sure that I covered everything that I needed to do. So I showed you the format, and let me go back to the absolute. And so now we understand that the format is X, Y, Z. Everything that we're creating today is just going to be in 2D stuff. So we can omit the Z option. We must know every single point. So in the examples that I showed you today, you knew where every single point was. And now you do know how to turn the dynamic input off and also verify that it's turned off. So I can physically see that this button here is grayed out at the bottom. Or I can I can look at my command line and I can actually see where things are. Another thing that I want you to take note of is that you do understand that when you're using this, these quadrants apply. So we created something in quadrant 1, which was all positive numbers. And then we took a look in quadrant 3, which all the values were negative. All right, so let's go ahead and go to the next one, which we're going to take a look at. And this is going to be the relative. Now, some of the things that we got to understand in the relative is that we're referencing the last point that we use in AutoCAD. We're going to turn our dynamic input on just so I'm going to show you that option. So I'm going to do it both ways. I'm going to create this object twice. The first one is going to be with the dynamic input off, and then the second one is with the dynamic input on. But you can already guess that if I turn that dynamic input off, I have to physically type in that @ symbol. Okay, so that's going to be the huge difference. I'm going to physically type it in every single time, but you can bypass that. That's why it's so important to understand that if your dynamic input is turned on or off. All right, so back in here, we're going to start a relative. And now remember when we're using the relative point, we can start it anywhere we want to. So I'm going to kind of pan this over a little bit, and I'm just going to throw in a kind of outrageous number here. And say I want to start my first point at somewhere look like 9,9, which will be somewhere up here. Now, I don't have to give it a coordinate, and I'm going to show you that. So the first thing I do is I have my dynamic input turned off, and I'm going to have to physically type in that @ symbol. All right, so I'm going to go to the line command. By default, it's asking me, where do you want to put your first location at? Where do I want to start this from? I can type in a coordinate, and it's going to take it as an absolute value, or I can physically click a point on the screen. I have those two options. So if I type in 9,9, sorry, it went 99, 9,9, enter, you're going to see that it will start absolutely from 9,9. All right, so now that I'm using the relative, I know that I want to go 5 units going this direction, and I want to go 0 in the Y direction. So I'm going to physically type in the @ symbol, and you can see that it appears down there. I want to go 5 on the X-axis, comma, 0 on the Y-axis. And that line should be going horizontal to the right. Enter, and it did do that. I'm just going to make a box out of this. I'm going to go 5 units up. So I'm going to type in the @ symbol. I'm going to type in, I want to go 0 on the X-axis, comma, 5 going up in the positive direction on the Y-axis. Enter. I want to go back to the left here. So I want to go at -5 on the y-axis. So I'm typing in the at symbol. -5, comma, 0, because I want to go 0 on the y-axis. And then I'm just going to hit the C function for close. I probably didn't mention this, but on these UCS, these Y's and X is telling you which way the positive X and Y directions are. So that way I can understand and know which direction I'm going. So when I typed in that 5, it's going this direction. It's going in the positive X direction. So that line is showing me where the positive X and where the positive Y is. All right. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn on that dynamic input. And then I can use this and I'm going to create it anywhere I want to, right? So I'm going to start the line command. I can select anywhere I want to, or I can type in a coordinate. I'm just going to click here. And I'm going to type in 5, 0. Enter. Then I'm going to type in the next one, which is 0, 5. Enter. The next one is -5, 0. Enter. And then C to close it. So you can see that it automatically put that add symbol in front. And if I hit the F2 button on my keyboard, it's going to bring up a list. And you can see I physically did not type in that add symbol, but it did it there for me, which is really, really nice thing to do for AutoCAD. All right. So now this will allow you to start something. So if I want to start in a negative area, which is down here in quadrant 3, it's going to still behave the same way. So if I start the line command and I select here, I'm still using the same thing. I'm just going to type in 5, 0, enter, 0, 5, enter, -5, 0, and then C to close. So I don't have to deal with trying to figure out where those points are. So this is really useful, and it will kind of save you from having to try to figure that stuff out. All right, so let's go ahead and take a look at the next method. Just to make sure that you understand, we kind of understand the format that this little at symbol here means from the last point. It means relative to the last point. The beautiful benefit of this, remember that we can start anywhere. We can click where we want to and start and then create our shape. We don't have to know where every single point is. Although when we use the line command, the first thing it's asking us is to select a point or give me an absolute point. We looked at the positive going to the right. Positive goes up. Negative left on the x-axis, negative on the y-axis is going down. If we're looking at the z direction, that's in and out. So negative is going to go into the screen and our z-axis positive is coming out. We're not going to have to worry about that until we get to 3D. And the major thing here is that we can have this turned on or off. The most important thing that is if we have this turned on, it saves us a benefit from having to type in this little at symbol every single time we create a point. All right. So that was a huge benefit of having that turned on. The last method here that we're going to take a look at deals with angles. All right. So we know that AutoCAD creates angles. And like I said before, going to the right, straight right is going to be a +0. And then we go from that direction. We can also go negative values. And let me go and kind of skip ahead a little bit to where you can see this tree. And what I mean by that is that if this is 0 going this direction, and this is 45, if I'm going 0 and I come down this direction, it's 315, or it can also be -45. So the negative value will go in a clockwise rotation. All right. So numbers typically in AutoCAD is going to create in a counterclockwise rotation. And their values are going to increase and positive in that direction. If I go the clockwise rotation, it's going to be negative numbers. For example, again, if I want to come down going this direction, I can either type in 270 or -90. Is the exact same thing. All right, so let's go ahead and kind of jump back to where we were. And this is the polar method. Remember, the format is going to be super important. That add symbol, the same thing applies. I'm just going to leave my dynamic input turned on, so it'll save us some time from having to type that in. The number in the front is going to be our distance. So that's going to be the distance, and then this is going to be the angle. Let's go ahead and take a look at how this goes. Okay, so starting with this one, let's go ahead and put some values in here of just creating some lines. So I'm going to start a line, and remember I can absolutely tell it where the first point is, or I can click somewhere on the screen, or we're going to click on O snaps when we start discussing that. So I'm going to click here, and now it's asking me, hey, which direction is your first point? So I'm going to type in 5. I have my dynamic input on. You can see on my screen that it's graphically next to my cursor. So I'm going to type in 5. I have to hold down the shift button and the comma button. Now it's jumping for an angle. So if I type in 5, angle 90, and that way it's going to go straight up in the air. So let's go ahead and go that direction. So 5, angle 90, that line should go up. If I want that line to go to the right, I can type in 5, angle 0. And that's going to send it to the right. Oh, it looks like I missed the 5 going into it. So, sorry, 5, angle 0, enter. Now if I want it to go down, I can type in 5, angle, and this is what I was trying to tell you before, is that you can type in 270 here, or I can type in that negative value. So I'm just going to type in a negative 90 here, and that line should go down, and then I can go see the close. All right, so now I'm going to kind of show you one of those things that's kind of confusing, and I don't think anybody will ever use it this way, but it's just to understand that the syntax of this. If I start a line command and I'm going to click here, and I want that line to originally go this direction, all right? But I want to give it some kind of, this is kind of one of those weird syntax things. I want it to go in this direction. So if I type in -5, and I'm using the polar method, by the way, so that -5 tells it to go, by default, opposite of what my angle is, right? So if I go -5, angle, and then I have to type in what angle I want it to be. And if I, in this case, if I want it to go to 0, right? I can type in 0, and this line should go to the left, which it does, right? So it's asking me to continue from the left. But I want this line to go, now I'm going to use a negative and another negative number, right? So I'm going to go -5, angle, -90. And I want you to kind of take a guess at which way you think this line is going to go. It's either going to go up or down. Remember that I want this line to go in a -90 direction. So -90 is pointing down. And that -5 tells it to go the opposite of what the angle that I'm telling you it to go. So in this case, if you're guessing that that line is going to go up, you are correct. So if I hit enter, you're going to see that that line will indeed go up. All right? And that's just weird syntax of understanding kind of what happens when you deal with negative values. So that negative value just says, hey, go the opposite of what that angle tells you to go. All right. So that's some of the things that you can take a look at in the line command as we're using this. The next feature that we're going to take a look at is going to be if we want to create something at some angles. And this is going to become really super important when we get to doing some of these examples. But for right now, I'm just going to kind of give you an introduction. A super fast way of doing things is that if your lines are going to be all 0, 90, 270, and 180, use the ortho method. By all means. So all of these boxes that I'm creating, the much quicker way of doing that is using a line command, select the first point, aim the direction. So I got the preview going this direction, type in 5, hit enter. You can see that my line is actually going up in the up direction. 5, enter. I want to go to the left. I want to aim it this direction, as long as I'm getting that line to go that direction. And what I mean by that is that if you're not looking on your screen and that line is still pointing up in this direction, when I type in 5, it's going to add another line going in the up direction at 5. So make sure that you're taking a look at the preview, and I'm going this direction, and I type in 5, enter, and then see to close. All right, that is super useful if you're creating things that are orthographically. All right, so the next thing, let's take a look at if we got something, or we want to turn this box at an angle, especially an angle of 45. Remember that these two commands cannot be on at the same time. I don't care how would you try it, how you're going to do it, it's just not going to happen. So if I go ahead and select this one, by default, this has to turn off. Likewise, if I select the ortho, the polar tracking turns off. So I'm going to turn polar tracking on, and remember the function key for this one is F10. they have a little fly up next to it. And this is where you want to lock the typical angles that you're going to use. So if I want to have this box going at a 45 degrees, I'm going to go 45, 90s, blah, blah, blah. I'm going to start the line command. I'm going to give it its first point. Remember, that's either absolute coordinate or click somewhere on the screen. So I'm going to click here. Now you can see I'm getting some kind of pre-selectors. I'm getting a green line that's kind of giving me a predictor of what direction you want it to go. So if I want to lock this going this direction, once it locks and I have that preview, I'm going to type in 5, enter. Then I'm going to preview it going this direction, 5, enter. Preview going this direction, 5, enter. And then C to close. All right. So that's kind of a really quick way of using the polar tracking method. Super useful when you have something that have a lot of different common angles. And we're going to see that in some of the examples, that'll be the quickest and more efficient way of drafting. And then one thing that you're going to learn about me by following these videos is that I look for most likely the more convenient or easiest way to create it, as opposed to taking you around the long way. So a lot of this stuff we're going to take a look at, and I'm going to go, okay, yeah, I can see this, and I'll try my best to explain that to you. All right. So that's everything that you're going to need to know about the line command in a nutshell. Just to kind of make sure I go back and recap, we understand that when we're using the polar method is that we have to use a distance, and then we have to use an angle. We looked at A and B can both be negatives. The negative values, especially in the A direction, will give you an opposite direction. And then understanding the negative values on the angles is also super important. And like always, it's a lot more convenient if you leave that dynamic input turned on. Some of the things we looked at is in the line command, is we learned how to create some straight lines and some lines at an angles. The reason why you see the word curve here, some programs will call it curves, but in AutoCAD, we're going to call them lines. We took a look at the command in AutoCAD is continuous until we either end that command by hitting the escape key or using the close function inside of it. We also took a look at if most of the lines are 90s, 180s, 270s, we're going to use that ortho mode. If the lines are going to be some of those common angles, we took a look at and seen what F10 does, which is polar tracking. And we also discussed that these two cannot live on at the same time. No way possible. If I turn one on, the other one will turn off. Some of the last things that we did is when we use the ortho command, we have to verify that it is going in the right direction. So this second bulletin is the most important point. If you don't verify that it's going in the same direction, it's going to go in a different direction. But remember, if you do mess up and do that, use the undo function inside of the command. Last thing I'm going to show you on this is going to be the polar tracking. And with the polar tracking, we made sure that we had that green line that it was snapped to the angle. Okay? And all we have to do with both of these is once it's in that right direction, just type in the distance and go ahead and hit enter. Super fast, super useful for everything we're going to do. All right? These next two commands I'm going to save for one more video after this one. So I'm going to make a lecture 3 as this one is getting a little long. So I'll give you a chance to go ahead and take a break. So remember that the third lecture of this one is just going to deal with these two commands, and it should be super short, super quick. Okay? So once again, if you found any value in this video, please go ahead and hit that like button, share, comment. Please subscribe if you enjoy what you're seeing. And I know these videos here are a little bit long, but trust me, as I'm teaching this stuff, it's going to go a lot quicker for you when we get into the examples. All right? So if you like what I do and you want to support me a little bit more, please visit my Patreon page, where sometimes I will release some other videos on there and some extra content on those. So hopefully you enjoyed this one. And when we come back and take a look at the next video on this one, it will be us taking a look at these two commands here. All right. Thank you for watching.